Arousal is another factor which may affect people's sporting performance. Weinberg and Gold in 2007 defined arousal as a general physiological or psychological activation varying on a continuum from deep sleep to intense excitement. In other words, it is your level of readiness to perform, so this could be very low, like just waking up, or really high, like jumping up and down. Arousal also prepares the body for action, and it refers to the level of motivation, alertness, and excitement in a particular moment, stated by Weinberg and Gold in 2007. For example, just before a race, someone's level of arousal is increased, meaning that they have high motivation, alertness, and excitement, and the body is ready for the race. Arousal is also used in the fight or flight theory, which is controlled by the autonomic nervous system and the central nervous system. The reticular activating system is what regulates levels of arousal and stimulation. This graph shows us how arousal levels affect performances. You can see that low levels of arousal are our quality of performance is low, and at high levels of arousal our quality of performance is also low. However, at medium levels of arousal, the performance is at its best. This suggests that in order to have the best performance, we do want arousal, but not too much or too little. We can also see that this graph shows a gradual increase and decrease, suggesting that as the levels become high, the performance improves and vice versa. Also, we can see that once the athlete has passed their optimum arousal levels, there is a stress zone. This is where the athletes begin to feel stressed and anxious, and as the level of arousal increases further, the performer panics and then performs badly. This is known as overload of arousal. Arousal is usually measured on a continuum, as you can see here. So at higher levels of arousal, it will be marked further to the right, and at lower levels, it will be marked further to the left. Somatic arousal relates to the changing state of the body, and cognitive arousal relates to the mind, and together they help to change the levels of arousal. It is likely that Rachel is performing at her optimum arousal level, as she is performing really well and thrives off of the atmosphere at games. There are four main theories that suggest how anxiety and arousal affect sporting performances. These include the drive theory, the inverted U theory, catastrophe theory, and individual zones of optimal functioning. The drive theory was first introduced by Hull in 1951. It is the most simplistic explanation of arousal and is also one of the first. It suggests a proportional linear relationship between arousal and performance, so as one increases, as does the other. This can be seen on the graph. It is showing that as the level of arousal increases, as will the quality of performance. However, in 1965, Zajac developed Hull's theory to suggest that increased arousal, also known as drive, brings out the dominant response. This dominant response is the most likely way that they will perform a task. For example, Nick is showing an overload of arousal, which is resulting to him returning to his most dominant response. He has worked with his coach to apply tactics, but never manages to apply them, and struggles performing more precise and accurate shots, and therefore he returns to his dominant shots, leading to a decrease in performance. The drive theory has some positive and negative points. The drive theory is true for experienced performers, and when a skill is learned so that the dominant response is correct. The theory is also true for gross motor skills. However, this theory is poor for inexperienced performers, as it is likely that their dominant response is incorrect, leading to a decrease in performance, and therefore the graph would decrease, which isn't shown. This theory also assumes that low arousal means poor performance. However, some athletes, such as archers and beginners, thrive off low arousal, as high levels may distract them, lower their focus, or increase the pressure. Lastly, this graph doesn't show differentiation between anxiety and arousal, and how one may change and affect the performance more than the other. Next is the inverted U theory. In 1908, Yerke Dodson developed the inverted U theory. This suggests that as arousal increases, as does the performance, until the optimum point where a further increase in arousal causes a gradual decrease in performance. This is shown by the graph on the left. The graph suggests that arousal and performance relationship is curvilinear. At this point on the graph, on the bottom left, it is suggesting that arousal levels are too low for performances to be good, suggesting that they have a wide attention field, meaning that they would be easily distracted and they would not be psyched up enough for a good performance. At this point on the graph, the bottom right, is where arousal then becomes anxiety, causing the performance to decrease. This may be because the performer's attention field is too narrow, causing the performer to be hypervigilant and psyched out. However, at the top of the U area, so around here, if you can see, is the area of optimum arousal. This is where you perform at your best. Your attention field is an ideal width, allowing the player to concentrate and absorb important information while accurately making decisions. This graph on the right shows us the graph for different activities. We know that introverts work better at lower levels of arousal and extroverts work better at higher levels of arousal. The red line on the graph represents the difference in arousal levels for fine and gross motor skills. Gross motor skills, such as a tackle in rugby, require large amounts of muscle movements and complex decision making. They are a high skill level, suggesting that they would work at lower levels of arousal, as the player needs to focus on completing the skill correctly. It is also suggesting that complex skills are best performed at lower levels of arousal. However, this graph also shows the performance level for fine motor skills, such as archery, and this is the blue dotted line. These skills are low skills and are simple, so they don't take a lot of decision making, such as running. This is suggesting that simple skills are best performed in high arousal. Sarah may be becoming under-aroused or easily distracted when it's time for her to perform her shot. This is because shooting a netball is a fine motor skill, suggesting that it is complex and needs a higher level of arousal to be able to perform at her best. This suggests that Sarah is under-aroused and has become distracted. The inverted U theory explains why someone's performance may be worsened due to over or under-arousal, which more people will accept. However, one curve does not explain that simple and complex tasks may need different optimum levels of arousal. Also, this graph does not account for individual differences, as it suggests the optimum level of arousal is always the midpoint on the curve. However, not everyone is the same, and some people cope with arousal better than others. Lastly, this graph suggests that an increase or decrease in performance is always gradual. However, there may be a sudden decrease in performance that the graph cannot account for. The catastrophe theory was introduced by Fazey and Hardy in 1988. They noticed that in the inverted U theory, performance doesn't always decrease gradually as arousal increases. They devised two graphs to explain this sudden change in performance. The first graph is the one at the top, and it shows us arousal and performance when there is low cognitive anxiety, but there is high somatic anxiety. This is the same as the inverted U theory, but links anxiety to the graph. The next graph shows us arousal and performance when cognitive and somatic anxiety are both high. This graph follows the inverted U graph up to a certain point where there is a sudden dramatic decline. This can be described as a catastrophe within the performance. A reduction in arousal is unlikely to return the performer back to their previous level. Therefore, the performer must relax in order to return to arousal levels below the point at which the catastrophe happened. Nick is becoming over-aroused in his games, causing him to make lots of mistakes. These can be seen as catastrophes. Nick is showing both cognitive and somatic anxiety, so the catastrophe theory may best describe why Nick is performing so badly. In order for him to return to his lower levels of arousal, he would need to fully relax. Nidifer, in 1976, argued that higher arousal levels may change levels of concentration and attention. He found that higher levels of arousal occur when athletes have too much information to process at one time. This can affect someone's performance as it causes a narrowing of their attention field, causing the performer to focus on the wrong cue. For example, in Sarah's netball matches, she may only focus on her shooting due to a narrowed attention field. This means that she may not be aware of the defenders or other players around her. One strength of this theory is that there are many types of research that support the relationship shown. However, it is difficult to test this and it cannot help to predict someone's performance.